Welcome to Soul Elevation, guiding your ascension to new heights. I'm your host, Kara Goodwin. You're going to love this episode with Dr. Melissa Sophia Joy. We talk a lot about the importance of embodiment in your spiritual awakening and how this differs from the Transcendence approach. She has wonderful stories of healing and transformation, as well as reassuring intel about the chaos humanity is undergoing right now. Dr. Melissa Sophia Joy, ND, is the founder of Somatic Awakening, an internationally recognized spiritual teacher, oracle, author, and naturopathic doctor, specializing in mind, body, spirit healing and multidimensional embodiment. She's also the founding director of Sophia Healing Academy, a mystery school dedicated to transformative healing and awakening through the union of somatic depth, spiritual wisdom, and divine connection. Over the past 25 years, she's taught consciousness, spirituality, energy medicine, and holistic healing. A divine feminine wisdom keeper and starseed, Melissa serves as a multidimensional channel and guardian of the Rose Grail lineage, an ancient path that weaves the law of love and the law of one into direct embodied experience, guiding others into profound healing, soul reclamation, and the anchoring of their divine essence. So I'll bring Melissa on in just a moment, but first, I want to invite you to explore everything available for you at karagoodwin.com. It is a sanctuary of support for your spiritual journey. You'll find my book, Your Authentic Awakening, as well as a library of free guided meditations and resources to help you deepen your connection with your higher self. You'll also find the summits, workshops, and live experiences that are coming up, all created to help you expand your consciousness and connect with a community of like-hearted souls. And I want to say a heartfelt thank you for supporting the show. Your likes, comments, shares, and subscriptions genuinely help this work reach more people. Please send this episode to one person who you think it will help today. And then go ahead and hit that like button while you're thinking about it. All right, let's begin. Enjoy this episode. Well, welcome, Melissa. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. Thanks for coming on Soul Elevation.
Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here with you.
So I want to start by talking about how you got into the more alternative pathways, because you have a long history in the realm of energy medicine and holistic healing, consciousness and spirituality, these are some of my favorite topics. So I would love to know how did you get into all of this?
Well, it's a very long story and there's many different facets of it, I can tell. I'll just share a bit here and there. So I was originally called to naturopathic medicine because I had an incredible healing with my own naturopathic doctor. I had very severe genetic eczema that I'd had from the time I was 3 months up until my mid-20s, very severely. And I had an incredible healing with him. And I went to Jamaica for about a 6-month period of time. And I had a come to Jesus moment. And I realized that, or actually I was called into being a naturopathic doctor, but not as a naturopathic doctor. The words that I heard in my vision was, it's time for you to step into being a modern day medicine woman. Mm-hmm. So from there, I went to naturopathic medical school. I then got a hold of a copy of The Fifth Sacred Thing by Starhawk. And in that book, the primary character is not only very intuitive, but she's a medical intuitive. And so I became kind of obsessed about medical intuition. Around that time, Carolyn Mace was just becoming popular. So I read all of her materials. And then I went to after I graduated naturopathic medical school, I went to a program in the Bay Area of California where I live, Academy of Intuition Medicine, studied there, learned a lot, learned how to not only be intuitive, use energy medicine, but also being a medical intuitive, and then started teaching there. And then on and on and on and unfolded. I have had many, many awakening experiences, many healing experiences. And so today, yes, I'm a licensed naturopathic doctor, but I'm also a mystic and an oracle and a spiritual teacher. So
wow, and
there's so many stories that can go with that.
Oh, I'm sure, and I would love to hear them. So with that big healing that you had with the eczema, was that a sort of instantaneous type of thing, or was that just like over time with once you got attuned with the correct remedy for you, you just couldn't believe the results?
Yeah, it was really over time.
Mhm.
The first thing that we did was look at my diet. I was very allergic to certain things that I loved. So we cleared them out of my diet, took a lot of different herbs, used a lot of different topical remedies. But the big thing that shifted it was working with my somatic emotions. And we did that originally through doing breath work. And I discovered a lot of anger inside of me from something that happened early whenever I was young. And as soon as we did that, that's when everything shifted because the emotions were really fueling the eczema. And so as I worked on an emotional level, then the eczema shifted. And it's genetic, so it still comes and goes, but mainly these days it's completely gone. And the real thing that got my attention there was the correlation between my emotional state and my physical body. So the next thing that I added as soon as I could, while going to naturopathic medical school and afterward, was learning many, many different mind, body, spirit modalities. And that's how I also became a mind, body, spirit specialist and still am to this day.
I love that. I just had a guest on Monday on a live stream, and she was talking about, she was telling a story about a child who she'd worked on, and she was like, he's allergic, talking to the mom, he's allergic to garlic. And the mom was like, well, he's been tested for everything, he's not allergic. And she found it in the mental body. And so it was like his it wasn't showing up on a physical test, but he had this allergy in the mental body. And once she stopped allowing him to have garlic, it cleared up, and it was eczema again. So it's
Oh, wow.
fascinating to me that you're telling now 2 days later this story, and it's got this emotional body connection to it, and that helped to clear it out. I mean, it's so powerful.
It's super powerful. And I just want to say, being in practice for over 25 years, those tests that test the food allergies, they're about 60 to 70% accurate. So we can't put all weight on that. But I have seen so many, many, many things just like that, where there is a past life issue or a familial inheritance of trauma issue or something that's stuck inside of the second chakra or the third chakra that is connected to the physical body and its direct manifestation of physical symptoms. So, I've seen just about everything at this point.
It's so wild. It's just amazing. Amazing. So it feels like we're seeing kind of more and more a type of gap in how far healing can go with traditional therapy and even with some spiritual practices. So, why do you think that these aren't always offering complete healing or transformation?
Well, that's a really good question. My sense of it is that I think the first thing I just want to say, because I work with a lot of healers, we all have the best intentions of healing and evolution and, what it is that we really need to do in order to heal. However, one of the things that I've really seen a lot is that when we only focus on the story, right, the past story of whatever trauma happened or whatever conditioning or even past life issue, if we only focus on the story and we don't bring it into the body, then that experience, whether it's through traditional talk therapy or through hypnotherapy, that can actually re-traumatize the body. And if we're only focusing on, say, for instance, the mindfulness or even spiritual awakening, those things can either jump over the deep energy, the somatic contraction stuck in our body, or even cause a spiritual bypass. And in some cases, I know for myself, there was a period where I was going through a huge amount of awakening over several years. And what ended up happening is that awakening caused the trauma to rise up inside of me in a way that was overwhelming. And so when we leave out the somatic body, the nervous system, and really tending that, not only from our consciousness, but from our higher self and from our connection to the divine, then what I've discovered is that there can be huge transformation because the energy of the trauma that's stored inside of us is met. And it's not only met by our mind, by understanding, but it's met with a power, a force, a love that has the ability to really fully be present with, to hold, to comfort, to nurture, to transform, to alchemically transfigure what's going on inside of us so that we're more free and that we have more ability to not only live in peace, but to live into who we really are.
I love that. So, do you have a story with a client or with yourself that kind of brings home what you've talked about? Because I think it can be a little bit complex to understand if some of these concepts are new to people, but maybe through a story it can land a little deeper.
Absolutely. Well, you know, I know a lot of healers, and most of the best healers are what we would call the wounded shamans or the wounded healers, right? We've been through our own deep, deep experience. And from that experience, we can then bring that depth out into the world. So I'll use myself as an example here because what I teach, Somatic Awakening and the School Sophia Healing Academy, that wasn't something that I thought I was going to do. It actually arose from my own experience. So I would say about 25, 26 years ago, I started having a lot of trauma recollection, both from this lifetime, things that I didn't know that were repressed, as well as many, many, many past lives. Now, a lot of times when I say that, people are like, wow, that's amazing. And it can be. But in this situation, the majority of all of these past lives were very traumatic, and it very much overwhelmed my system, so much so that I started having panic attacks and other things like that. And before this, I didn't have any history of panic attacks. And so what happened is that I really threw myself into my healing. And I not only experienced a lot of modalities, but I learned a lot of modalities. I had a lot of experiences and medicine journeys, initiations, and this and that. And this is why I can say, you know, everyone is attempting to heal, but sometimes it can make things worse before it gets better. So I was at a place about 17, 18 years ago where I had deeply surrendered, where I had tried so many things and I wasn't really feeling the peace inside of myself that I was really longing for. And so what ended up happening is that I really went into my meditation practice in a really deep way. And I heard from my spirit, it's time to really allow the divine in on a level that you have never done before. So I said, okay, I'm in. What do I need to do? And it was deeper and deeper and deeper surrender. And it was right around that time that I ended up having a very bad flu, very high fever, almost went to the ER. And as I was coming down from that fever, I was awakened in the middle of the night with a vision of Yeshua and Mary Magdalene coming to me and saying, it's time for you to remember who you are, what you're here to remember, and to share with others. And in this process, you're going to be completely healed. And so I was paying attention, like, yes, please, thank you. What do I need to do? And so one of the primary things that they said is, you know, go through this multi-year healing experience and to really get serious about my meditation practice. You know, I've been a meditator for a very long time, but after the birth of my daughter, I kind of, you know, stopped for a bit. And so I started meditating on a daily level. And what ended up happening is that Mary Magdalene and others, Mother Mary, Yeshua at times, other beings, Kuan Yin, other, you know, many ascended masters started coming to me and teaching me what I now call somatic awakening, which is in essence, not only how to use what we normally call our witness consciousness, but how to actually connect to witness consciousness from our higher self that has this very powerful ability to stabilize and to be present and to bring that part of us down into the body, to the places that are suffering, that are lost, that are frozen, that are hurt. And in that process, when we're really holding presence with our higher self witness consciousness, with these, what I'll call somatic contractions of trauma, as they start softening and trusting, then even higher and higher frequencies of divine energy come in. What I call the conduit of divinity becomes activated. And whatever this trauma needs, it receives in the right and perfect timing for it. And so I have seen miraculous, deep, miraculous experiences, both from my own experience as well as now working with this, teaching it for the last 15 or so years, many, many, many countless students and patients. But it started with me. It started with me feeling such a deep, profound sense of peace and coming home to myself in a way that I hadn't experienced from my perspective, actually in lifetimes and lifetimes. And so 2012 for me was a huge birth moment of coming into not only an understanding of what's possible when we transform, but what's possible when we transform and awaken the divine that's inside of us.
That's beautiful. Let's talk about the crucial element that is brought in through embodiment. Now, you may have touched on this already, but I'd like to spell it out.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's many, many different ways of looking at embodiment and what embodiment is. A lot of people have different definitions of embodiment. So what I'd like to do, first of all, is just take a moment and define what I mean by embodiment, what it means in somatic awakening. So what it means, first of all, is that we work with transforming the density inside of our being. So when I say density, I'm talking about the somatic contractions, the density within the psyche, definitely within the ego parts and programs, all the negative voices, right? So we're working as a path. This doesn't happen all at once, as you can imagine, over time to create more and more peace, more spaciousness inside of our body. And as we move more into this spacious place, there are two things that happen, because in somatic awakening and what I call the practice, which is what I'm defining here, the higher self-witness consciousness coming in and divine energy coming in and transforming, in the practice, you're already connecting with higher self energy and divine energy inside of you. So it is moving through you, meeting those places, and as soon as those places respond and relax and the contractions melt away, then you have more space for that higher self divine energy coming in to form. And as this happens more and more, what occurs is we come into contact with the essence of the divine inside of us. And you know, different people have different definitions. So bear with me for a moment. I want to define two different things. And this is how I have been shown, how I've been taught through these masters, is that the spirit is the energy of ourselves that is at one, ultimately at one with the divine, that is in our higher chakras and definitely in our body, but it can move through us. The soul is, the way that I define it, is the divine essence that lives inside of us. And our ego and psyche and these dense contractions can actually build this density around these different aspects of the soul. We can say the soul lives within the body, but there are definitely different aspects within the body where it lives the most, like the heart, for instance, and other places. And so as these densities dissolve and transform, then we come into more connection with the soul and the divine energy within the soul. And that's where there's soul elevation, where we can really come into that connection with the divinity that it's in unification with who we are, our soul purpose, our soul mission, our soul passion, and ultimately the oneness of the divine inside.
Beautiful. So I'd love to get your perspective on why this moment in history feels so intense for so many people, and how do you understand these collective difficulties as an initiation rather than a failure or a collapse?
Well, this is a really important question because we are living in some really poignant times. And so, from a somatic and evolutionary perspective, humanity, from my perspective, is encountering the consequences of accumulated unintegrated trauma. And this is definitely from present life. There's a lot that's going on, not only individually, but also collectively, that we are now seeing, as well as from past life perspective, whether you believe that you've been here before or not, there's a lot of past material over the last few eons of a huge amount of violence and power over programming and all of these different things, right? As well as how we are inheriting that from a familial. I have seen and experienced now so many people, myself included, that have trauma from our familial lineage. We can call it from an energetic, genetic perspective, what have you. And so this is really happening on an individual as well as a collective level. And so what has been suppressed is now surfacing, right? It's like a boil that's being lanced. Like, it really does need to happen because this is where healing occurs, but it's not easy, right? And so I think many of us are praying for this transition to happen with ease and grace so that all the systems stay in place, so that there's going to be very little traumatization from it in the system, sense of food systems and transportation systems and all of that. But in the bigger picture, I believe that we're going through this process as a collective initiation. And of course, I'm not the only person that speaks to this, but I want to speak to it in a way where we can really drop in, because a lot of times people use the word like ascension. I don't have any problem with that word, but my perspective is that we also need to work with what are we transforming and what are we living into. The big invitation is that we're transforming the lower ego. We're transforming these densities, and we're transforming how the lower ego has been in cahoots, so to speak, or best friends with the linear mind. We can call it the lower linear ego mind, that continues to perpetuate these negative cycles, whether it's a cycle of like what I've talked about before, like the victimizer program, the power over program that the many governments have been running, or corporations, or people in power, the 1% have been running, or our own lack of ability of seeing our own worth, or any self-hatred or self-loathing, or the inability to love ourselves, or any negative voice that can perpetuate us staying in this lower vibratory 3D consciousness. And as we shift more and more, again, we step more and more into our divine humanity. But we're definitely not out of the woods yet. I was just writing a blog yesterday about 2026 being the year of the fire horse and all of that, what's coming in with that, because there's so much momentum and transformation and movement forward and freedom, but it also really represents intensity and visibility and emotional honesty with ourselves, right? And so what we're really being asked to do is to take responsibility for ourselves in a way that most of us don't really understand what that means. So when I say take responsibility for yourself, I'm not talking about, being in a conversation with a friend and take responsibility for your part. I am including that, but at the bigger level, really taking responsibility for all of our ego, for all of our parts, for who we really are, to actually transcend the negativity that has been running inside of us, much less externally, right? And as we do this more and more, we naturally will step into this evolutionary process of coming back home to our sweet humanity, allowing it to be what it is, and also at the same time, as I said before, allowing our divineness to also be here, our divine humanity, or as a fellow teacher calls our collective consciousness that is in alignment with this divine energy that we are. So in essence, as we step more and more into this field of this conscious divine humanity, we naturally will then be living more in coherence and be able to move that energy just by living it out into the world and affect more and more change just by living in that coherence.
I love it. You mentioned some key words for me that are big. Coherence is very big for me. The sovereignty and the responsibility are huge. And I love that you differentiate between, okay, yeah, it includes like, okay, if I say something hurtful or if I overstep, then I take responsibility for that. But it's so much bigger. And when you're talking about systems that are changing and, this whole thing started with the intensity of the time and we want things to be gentle, but we are being given the opportunity to see the structure of our reality in a new way. And so, for example, if we have been giving our power to the government or to health systems and we say, fix me, oh, you're responsible for me being secure and healthy, and it's the government's responsibility. If I shouldn't eat overly processed food, if the government's saying it's okay to be sold, it's not my responsibility because it's there. It shouldn't be there if I shouldn't eat it. It's this rewiring so that we understand that the government is not protecting us. They never have been. And it's not their responsibility. We are sovereign beings, but when we hand ourselves over and we say, nope, you're my mom, you're my dad, you make the decisions for me, and then I just do what I'm told, we're maturing out. We have the opportunity to mature out of that, but it takes responsibility. And so on the bigger standpoint, all of us as individuals, need to start shifting to see, yes, sovereignty, yes, freedom, yes, let's get out from underneath this. And we then need to we need to be willing to take that responsibility for ourselves in a way that I don't know that a lot of people have connected yet. So I love that you're bringing all of that together too, because it's so important. I think it's a really key theme for where we are right now.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you're saying that in this way, because I'm getting an intuitive hit actually to share something. And, I'm talking about how, we are divine and we're also human, but it's a path to get there. And one of the first places we begin in somatic awakening is really coming into connection with what I call adult consciousness.
I love that.
And so adult consciousness it's part of our higher ego. It's also part of our higher self. And I actually have an introductory class to somatic awakening. And that very first class, a part of that is a transmission from Green Tara. And she talks about how adult consciousness is the most important thing in our collective consciousness right now. Because when we have the ability to actually evolve from child consciousness through teenage consciousness to adult consciousness, and you're right, taking responsibility for what we eat, how we live, what we think, who we are, who do we connect to? Who do we give our power away to? Do we keep our power? How do we keep our power? What does it mean to have healthy boundaries and sovereignty, right? Adult consciousness, it stabilizes us. And it stabilizes us in relationship to all the negative voices that say, oh, mommy, or take care of me, or I'm going to play the push-pull game with you, just like I did my mom or my dad, right? And so in essence, it's one of the first significant steps in our evolution. And a lot of us, probably a lot of people listening to this podcast already know what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about everyone, or I'll say Green Tara in that transmission was talking about everyone. And we can see on the national stage right now, there's a lot of people not in adult consciousness.
I love that. Yes, it's so poignant. So, how can someone stay rooted in compassion, truth, and presence during these times while there's this potential tip into being overwhelmed or numb or spiritually disconnected?
I love this question because most people who are sensitive, at least in my experience, or most people who are spiritual rather, are sensitive. And just about everyone I know who are sensitive are struggling with this because there's so much that's coming out. It just keeps on coming out over and over and over. Right now we're in a very intense node, and it'll slow down, but then something else will come up. And so the first thing that I want to say is that it's important to know that if you are sensitive, the struggle is normal. So if you haven't gotten to that place yet, I invite you to know, to feel, to sense like I'm not alone. This is normal. Also, compassion doesn't mean taking on all the suffering, right? I used to teach a program called Consciousness Healing and Ecology at a liberal college in California. And there was a lot of people, students, who would merge with everything that was going on, and they then be completely overwhelmed. It's what I call hyper empathy, right? Where we merge with everything and this overwhelms our system. So it's important for us to understand that we have appropriate boundaries. So for me, that means I don't always listen to the news. I mean, I do stay abreast, but there's no way that I could listen to the news every day and not be overwhelmed, right? So we find the ways in which we have our appropriate boundaries. And then the other thing that I have found that is really helpful is being in presence, actually really nurturing a spiritual practice that allows you to feel what you're feeling and allows you to also be in presence, because presence really protects us against both collapse as well as dissociation. And so somatic awakening teaches us to return to this presence within the body, to connect with the parts of us that have this ability to be in presence with anything that feels overwhelmed or that you're running too much energy around, or it activates pain, struggle, suffer, whatever it is, right? And then we work with it in a way so that your higher consciousness is here coming into contact with whatever the difficulty is, and to work with it from a place of right and perfect distance, right? And so it modulates the intensity, and it allows for there to be this container, this potent container, so that this energy can really feel the divine presence, or what I call gnosis or clairgnosis. It's the feeling, sensing, intuiting energy of the divine presence. And so when we allow this divine presence in our body, not just from a linear perspective or from a visualization perspective, but from a real perspective, what happens is that any parts of us that feel scared or hurt or suffering, they begin to soften and they begin to transform. So we have more ability to be with what's going on rather in the world. The other thing I just want to say is that for those of you who are feeling overwhelmed right now, one of the primary ways that you can really come back home is to find regulation in your nervous system. And there's many different ways to find regulation. So I'll just give you just a couple of hints here. One of the ways that the nervous system finds regulation the most is through rhythms, right? So you find your rhythm of rest and self-care versus engagement. I actually was just on a call yesterday with a patient. She was trying to figure out, should I go out? I'm not feeling well. What should I do? Right. So to really find that, should I rest? Should I engage? Because too much rest can feel stifling. Too much engagement can feel overwhelming. But the right amount of both is really aligned to regulation, as well as feeling, working with whatever's going on, turning toward it, as well as time of integration, where you're not pushing, you're just allowing things to settle in, healing to move into more deeper felt integration inside, as well as times of spiritual practice, really throwing yourself into whatever meditation practices or yoga practice or whatever that is, but then also having time of play, right? So both of those need to be in balance as well. And so above all, the deeper thread here is listen to your body and act on what feels supportive and nurturing to your body in the big picture.
I love that. So I'd love to know more about the Sophia Healing Academy and its evolution and what is coming up next.
Well, this is an exciting time for Sophia Healing Academy. I have been teaching somatic awakening for almost a decade, and I am in the process of finishing a book for publication. But over the last year or two, the guides have been coming to me and saying, you know what, somatic awakening is a very important aspect of healing and awakening and embodiment, but there's more. And so I'm now being invited to step more into teaching different topics that have been moving through me in my own awakening, my own experiences. And so this year, actually what's going to be happening is that we're going to be opening even more to quantum awakening, and there is going to be a introductory class in April called Awakening the Quantum Self. I had to look at my notes because I just came up with that name last night.
Ooh.
Awakening the Quantum Self, a foundational course into coherence and creation, and that's going to be coming out late April, as well as a 7-month program called Quantum Awakening, Living from the Quantum Field, and that's going to be starting in the fall, probably at the beginning of October, late September, something like that. And so right now I'm in a first run of that program with a lot of advanced students, and oh my gosh, our reality is changing so significantly. I'm actually getting ready to teach a class this Sunday called Quantum Jumping and Timeline Collapsing. So we're definitely diving in on a very, very significant level.
Wow. And so who would be the right type of person for these offerings?
You know, the type of person that usually the students who come to me that most resonate with this is the type of person who's already tried a lot. You know, they've been a seeker for a while, and very often they have tried this and tried that and tried this other thing, but it's not settling in them in the way that they really long for. It's like that place where I was before, where I had tried so many things, but I really long for this deeper sense of peace. I really long for actually fully embodying myself and then living from this place of embodiment. Because this is what's so exciting about what's happening now. Somatic awakening really helps stabilize all of the awakening, all the healing experiences that you've had before, and really take it into the holy body, into our precious body, so that we can begin to understand, feel, sense this divine energy that's living through us. And then from there, then we step into these much bigger, much wider fields. You know, I know a lot of people that, you know, I say quantum awakening, but they have this idea of like up and out. Oh, ascension, right? I'm like, well, that's part of it, but we're going to be doing it from the body, right? And so we bring in this awakening of this divine human energy, and then we make contact with the field in this coherent field, and that's where incredible magic happens. And this is just, can I say one thing?
Yeah.
This is just the beginning. There's more coming. Like in the next few years, they're telling me more and more and more. I'm like, oh my gosh,
Wow.
I'm so excited.
Well, I love, throughout this conversation, you've been talking about obviously the embodiment, because that is the somatic element of it. You mentioned early in the interview about, the potential for spiritual bypassing as we are going through an awakening. And when we come across some trauma, whether that is past life trauma or previous trauma that we've had in this life that got buried, and it starts to show itself, and we may have that temptation to bypass it. And then you're talking about that, like, people mistaking going quantum for like, going out of the body, and the ascension, you're like indicating up, going up and out. And the difference between that type of seeking of the up and out, like, let me get in. And I think I was like that for like it more in the beginning of my journey where, yeah. So if you're just listening, she's like raising her hand. Yes, me too. I think a lot of us, I think that was just like a more traditional spiritual seeking path where it was like, oh yeah, we can get out of here. And I still enjoy like OBEs, out of body experiences and things like that. But I feel that more and more we're being, sorry, something came in my throat there. I feel like more and more we're being invited to utilize the human technology that we've been given through this body. You know, these are amazing creations. Our physical bodies are these amazing creations, and we have all of these access points to the quantum, to timelines, to our higher self, to different parts of ourselves through the body. And that's what I love that I keep hearing, like the undercurrent of this conversation is this way to utilize the human technology in order to have those experiences in the quantum. You know, they're so interlinked, but I really want to be able to take the opportunity to drive that point home for listeners that if you associate spiritual growth with the ability to get out, you know, that's not all that it is. And you may really be missing something, some opportunities if you're always trying to transcend.
Absolutely. I was actually just writing in my last chapter of my book, um, the difference between the up and out awakening and the down and in awakening. And the up and out awakening usually happens first, right? I know when I was 26, I spent a summer at a yoga meditation retreat, and I had my first awakening experience, and it was with Divine Mother, and it was up and out. But then over time, I started realizing what actually happens when we bring it down and in. And down and in, at first, it can seem more difficult because guess what? These precious human bodies store trauma,
And they're so
right?
dense too,
And
you
there's,
know?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So as we bring this down and in energy, this divine energy down and into our body, right, the transformation can happen so that we can activate the divine frequencies inside of us. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about what I'm teaching now, because now we're talking about advanced embodiment and sacred anatomy. And where do we make contact with the soul inside of ourselves? Well, there's many different places, and each place has a different frequency, right? But we're also talking about things like Akashic records. So we're doing up and out, but guess what? The Akashic field, the way that it's showing up now, is there's huge amount of healing energy that's there that goes directly then into the body so that we become the cosmic human.
I love that. And you know, Melissa, the other piece to this that came to mind when you were saying that is the fact that we are incarnated. So we have these amazing souls that have chosen to take a human body at this important time. And when we are going through the work that you're offering, the service that we do to the collective through the embodiment of that higher frequency, that is a service to humanity.
Exactly.
So the more people who are fully, because it's so there are all those individual benefits that we've been talking about this whole time. But for people who really feel service oriented and that they are here on purpose and on a mission, this is part of it. You know, this is, yes, you may have vocation, you know, you may be a healer, you may be a podcaster, you may be a performer, you may be, you know, doing sound bowls and offering all kinds of ways for people to connect with their soul. But the more that you are bringing your soul into this human body, then you're anchoring that light in as you move through your life. And that is that in and of itself is a huge service.
I
So,
totally agree. I was actually just working with a person who is an advanced student few days ago, actually. And she is a retired corporate executive, like worked for one of the top-notch financial companies, is extraordinarily wealthy, but now she's retired. And she's been in this inquiry for a long time because I got to know her as she was getting ready to retire. And she's an incredible spiritual practitioner. And we were doing some really, really, really deep work. And her primary question is, what now? What am I really being asked to do now? And the answer that arose, that she received, that I was helping channel through, was, you're a tower. You're a lighthouse. You're a beacon. This is who you are. And tears were just streaming down her eyes. And she was feeling this potency of how significant this is, not only to her experience, but to everyone around her. How she is beaming this light out onto the world, being this tower, this beacon. And we both were incredibly touched, like a person who is very, very awake, who is living in a cave in the Himalayas. They are deeply, deeply, deeply affecting the evolution of humanity's collective consciousness. So anytime that we can take that next step in evolution, we're definitely not only affecting ourselves, we're affecting everyone around us and those that we don't even see as well.
100%. I love that. So this has been an amazing conversation. I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing. Can you please share how people can connect with you?
Absolutely. So you can go on sophiahealingacademy.com, and there are a lot of free resources there. There's a free ebook that you can check out, as well as a lot of different meditations and introductory courses and many different things. Yeah. And if you want to check out my practice doing one-on-one work, that's somatic-awakening.com, and that goes into all the different levels and layers of things that we can do one-on-one together.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for coming on Soul Elevation. This has been a beautiful conversation.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a deep pleasure.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Soul Elevation. If someone in your life would be inspired or uplifted by what you heard today, please take a moment to share it with them. These are the kinds of conversations that ripple out and elevate collective consciousness. And if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the powerful episodes ahead. Your presence, energy, and support truly help amplify this mission of raising frequency and anchoring in a more awakened humanity. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you for the next episode of Soul Elevation.